Hello everyone, and welcome back to Translationborne, the show where we take a closer look at some of the choices that got made in taking the Japanese version of Bloodborne and putting it into English. Since we just defeated Father Gascoigne, there are a number of quests and storylines that are either now available to us or that we can continue from earlier that we're going to spend this episode focusing on. And it all begins with this item, the red jeweled brooch. It identifies that dead body we just picked it up off of as likely being the little girl's mother, Viola. But let's take a look at the description. Red jeweled brooch. A woman's bright red brooch engraved with the name Viola. Perhaps the jewel is a gift from a hunter, used to change into a droplet blood gem that fortifies any weapon. With the proper workshop tool, various weapons can be fortified, and this translation is both solid and pretty straightforward. But I think it lends itself well to the exploration of an issue that comes up a lot in Japanese to English translation, and that it's important to focus on with video games in particular. That is, what do you do with the subject of any given line? Of course, that may seem like a strange question to a native English speaker. In general, it's very important in English grammar to have a subject in a sentence. English even makes use of dummy subjects, that is, subjects whose only point in being in a sentence is just so that the sentence has a subject. An example of this might be when you say, "It's almost time." Think about it. In that example, what exactly is almost time? Well, nothing really, it's just a way that we have of expressing a concept. So subjects are a very important part of English sentence phrasing, but in Japanese, you can actually just drop a subject entirely. For example, you could say in Japanese, "Kore kara ikimasu," and you might translate that as "I'm leaving now," or "I'm about to head out," or something along those lines. But if you wanted to get very literal, what you've said boils down to something like, "From this point, in time, go," formal, non-past. In other words, the conjugation of the verb there gives you a level of formality and it gives you the tense, but it doesn't give you the subject. It's not like, say, Spanish, and again I apologize for my pronunciation, where you'd say, "Yo estoy, tú estás," and so on. There the verb has to agree with the subject. But in Japanese, it's quite common to have to infer what the subject is purely from context. So with that in mind, let's look back again at the first line of the red jeweled brooch. It says, "A woman's bright red brooch engraved with the name Viola." One more literal translation might be, "A woman's bright red brooch. The engraved name Viola can also be made out on it." But you could also have a more literal version of that line that would read, "A woman's bright red brooch. You can also make out the name Viola carved into it." It's entirely possible, in other words, to translate a good deal of that item description using the second person. So keep that in mind as we're forced to make a difficult decision regarding this little girl.
"Hello, Mr. Hunter. Still can't find my mum."
Maybe it's best if we don't give her the brooch.
"Yes, okay. I can wait. Mum knows I'm really brave, and you're very kind. I won't be afraid. I'll be a good girl. I promise."
Okay, there are a few things worth discussing there, but first I'd like to get back to what I was talking about in regards to choosing subjects, and I will do that after I've cut this next loading screen. So, as I was saying, this item description, and a number of others, could easily be done in the second person. Of course, the second person is generally something you want to avoid in English. Here's an alternative, somewhat more literal version of the red jeweled brooch, for instance. "A woman's bright red brooch. You can also make out the name Viola carved into it. That gem was probably a gift from some hunter. Upon use, it becomes a rare droplet blood gem. If you have a workshop tool, you can strengthen all kinds of weapons." Now just compare the last line of the official translation. With the proper workshop tool, various weapons can be fortified. Clearly that official version sounds a lot better and more natural. But now it's time to take a look at a fairly important lore note. The Bergenworth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame. It makes my head shudder uncontrollably. Interestingly, lost master there would more literally be translated as something like, "Our master who can't be seen," or "which can't be seen." We've yet to see why that change might be significant though, so for now just file that away for future reference. And in the meantime, here's another item description. Blood Gem Workshop Tool. A misplaced workshop tool from the hunter's dream. The hunter who retrieves this can fortify weapons by kneading blood gems into them. Blood gems add properties to weapons when used to fortify them, as blood defines an organism. Alright, and for the most part, that's a pretty straightforward translation. But to briefly finish my point from before, games tend to have particular and characteristic ways of addressing the player. And that's something you always want to keep in mind, especially when translating item descriptions. You want to get the tone just right. And with that in mind, let's all enjoy this next cutscene. So, here we are in the Cathedral Ward at last. The first thing we're going to do is light this lamp, and then we're going to turn around and have a chat with a certain NPC who's waiting over here in the corner. This guy does look kind of weird, but let's see if he has anything to say to us.
Oh, you must be a hunter. Very sorry. The incense must have masked your scent. Good. I've been waiting for one of your ilk. These hunts have everyone all locked up inside, waiting for it to end. It always does, always has, you know, since forever. But it won't end nicely, not this time. Even some folks hiding inside are going bad. The screams of women folk, the stench of blood, the snarls of beasts, none of them's too uncommon now. Yarnum's done for, I tell ya. But if you spot anyone with their wits about them, tell them about this here Erden chapel. They'll be safe here. The incense wards off the beasts. Spread the word. Tell them to come on over, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, any other requests?
I know I shouldn't be asking you, but if you happen upon someone while hunting, tell them about this here Erden chapel. If they seem worth being told, that is. Oh, and I do sincerely hope they are.
Well, he seems a little bit creepy, but I suppose we can keep his request in mind. For now, though, we're going to go back to the hunter's dream, and that means I'm going to cut this next loading screen. I'll see you after the break. Alright, that was actually a fairly straightforward dialogue, and so we're not going to stop, we're going to plunge on and talk to some more people. Gehrman, now that you're back, what do you have to say?
The moon is close. It will be a long hunt tonight. If the beasts loom large and threaten to crush your spirits, seek a holy chalice, as every hunter before you has. A holy chalice will reveal the tomb of the gods, where hunters partake in communion.
Where might I find one of those?
Most of the holy chalices lie deep within the tomb of the gods, and the few that found their way to the surface were lost again in the hands of men. But if the old hunter tales remain true, one of the holy chalices is worshipped in the valley hamlet. Yet the town is in disarray. It was burned and abandoned for fear of the scourge. Home now only to beasts. The perfect place for a hunter, wouldn't you say?
Alright, so while he repeats his dialogue, I have a few points to make. First of all, in the earlier part of the dialogue when Gehrman says, "A holy chalice will reveal the tomb of the gods," there's a little bit more in the Japanese version there. Literally, that line would come out to something like, "A holy chalice will reveal the tomb of the gods, and that blood will become the hunter's nourishment." Also, the next line is very important as it introduces the concept of communion. Literally, the line is something of a command. Go and humbly receive the holy body. Though it's important to note that humble reception of the holy body is literally the Japanese word for communion. Finally, something interesting is going on with the subjects of the lines. Most of the holy chalices lie deep within the tomb of the gods, and the few that found their way to the surface were lost again in the hands of men. Literally, the final two of those lines would translate to something more like, only a few holy chalices were brought back to the surface. Their whereabouts are unknown, but... And by the way, I am leaving in this loading screen so I can finish my point. But anyway, like I said before, think of the change in subjects. Saying that the few holy chalices that made their way to the surface were lost again in the hands of men almost has the implication that the chalices found the way to the surface on their own. Literally in the Japanese, though, it's clear that the chalices were brought up out of the tombs of the gods. Then they were just lost, with the hands of men not really being mentioned. But now for another word with this guy.
Oh, the hunter. Alive and well, are ya? This here's a safe place. Stay as long as you like. But next time you're out on a hunt, remember what I asked. If you find any sane survivors, tell them to seek shelter at Erden Chapel. Because there's nothing to fear here.
Alright, this guy continues to be a little bit creepy. His dialogue is also straightforward again, and he's repeating information at this point, so I'm just going to talk over him. The dialogue that I actually want to focus on now is the one we had with the little girl not so long ago. If you talk with her and refuse to give her the red jeweled brooch before you find any safe places, she'll say, "Mum knows I'm really brave and you're very kind. I won't be afraid, I'll be a good girl, I promise." And I'll leave this loading screen in to give you a direct comparison of a literal translation, which might be, "I am my mother's daughter after all, and you're very kind. Even if I am all by myself, I'm not really lonely." So clearly they made some pretty big changes there. Something that I'll talk more about after I quickly read this lore note. A holy chalice is said to be enshrined in Old Yarnum, seated in the valley. And since that's a pretty straightforward translation, let's get back to the point about the girl's dialogue. So the change to the line from "I am my mother's daughter after all" to "Mum knows I'm really brave" I like a lot. The girl's putting on a brave face, she's referencing her mother, and bravery is clearly a trait they have in common. The second line, though, I think is interesting enough to merit leaving in this loading screen. In both cases, she's giving us an assurance, either that she isn't really lonely or that she'll be good and isn't afraid. Also, in both cases, she's contradicting herself. Earlier in the game, she literally says, "I'm all alone and scared." Though in the literal version she denies being lonely, and in the official version she denies being scared. I also think it's interesting they added the part about her saying she'll be a good girl, too. Overall, I think this makes for a good change, but those subtle differences do interest me. But anyway, talking does seem to be an option here again.
Oh, well, hello. Splendid. Let me ask you a small kindness. You're soon off to hunt, I presume? Then, if you find any survivors, tell them to seek Iosefka's clinic. Upon my Hippocratic oath, if they are yet human, I will look after them. Perhaps even cure them. This sickness, these beasts, they are not to be feared. This time the night is long. I may be trapped here, but I should do something to help. I'll even offer a reward for your cooperation. Tempted? Well, off you go then.
You sound different. Anything else to say?
If you find anyone who's still human, send them straight to Iosefka's clinic. You can assure them there's no place safer. Please, do me this service.
So, in case you didn't catch it, this is actually someone impersonating Iosefka, the doctor we were talking to before. And there are a few things to note about the translation of those lines. First, there's the way she mentions her Hippocratic oath. As I understand it, some people have problems with this line in the same way that others have issues with the Molotov cocktail. That term Hippocratic being associated with the ancient Greek doctor Hippocrates. And in this case, the Japanese in question would literally translate to something like, "As a doctor, I will look after them, perhaps even cure them." So I feel like this translation is a little bit more of a jump, but ultimately this isn't an issue that really bothers me. And the core of the idea is still coming across just fine. This woman is pledging us her honor as a doctor to look after people. But in any case, while there is more to say about Imposter Iosefka, right now it's time to check in with Gilbert.
You needn't concern yourself with me. I'm afraid I'm of little help now. But before I did this, I made no use of it, but perhaps you. What afflicted me was incurable, but this town gave me hope. Their strange blood bought me time. I was most fortunate, unharmed by the plague of beasts. I can even die human.
Sounds like you've got it bad. Anything else to say, though?
Don't you worry about me.
Alright, I want to talk about Gilbert's dialogue there, but first I want to finish up a couple thoughts on Imposter Iosefka's lines. First, in the line where she says, "This sickness, these beasts, they are not to be feared," there's a little bit more information in the original Japanese there. Literally, she's quoting that line about not needing to fear the sickness or the beasts, and then saying that we should tell that to other people. Now, generally in translation, it's a good idea to avoid verbal quotations. That could have been a stylistic omission, or maybe the character limitations were a problem, but I thought the change was worth mentioning. Also, the line she uses to dismiss us in English is different at the end of each of her dialogue sets, but in the Japanese, it's exactly the same. In the original, it's "Yoroshiku onegai ne," while in English it's first, "Well, off you go then," and then, "Please do me this service." Literally, the second line is closer to the original Japanese, but I really like these translation choices. It wouldn't really make sense for her to say, "I'll even offer a reward for your cooperation." Tempted? Please do me this service. It's a really elegant way to translate what can be used as almost a stock phrase in Japanese. But now it's time to tell this woman we found a safe place.
Now what is it now? There are much better ways to pass the time. Unless you found me a nice safe place.
Yes, let me tell you about this nice chapel.
Well, what do you know? An outsider worth a lick of salt. Well, don't just stand there. Don't you have work to do? Go slit some throats. Get this mess done with.
What if I'd rather knock on your door again?
Oh, enough with you. Trot along. Chop, chop.
Another nice, friendly Gehrman conversation. But before we talk about those translations, I'd like to go back and get to Gilbert's dialogue. There are a couple things that I think were handled particularly well. First, there's the way he trails off, and I'm thinking specifically of the line where he says, "But before I take this." Literally, the Japanese there would translate to something like, "Finally, this." And the difference there in part comes down to another stylistic difference between Japanese and English. It's a lot more stylistically acceptable in Japanese to trail off without finishing a sentence. I've even worked on projects where we've had specific instructions to fill in as many incomplete sentences as possible. So the way this particular localization gets around the problem, I think, works very well. It makes it clear that he's going to give you something, which is true in the Japanese, even if that literal version I gave you doesn't make it sound all that obvious. But it also trails off in a way that allows you to finish the sentence, and which seems natural for the character not wanting to talk about their own death. Besides the way the sentences trail off, though, I also like how succinct the translation manages to be. A literal version of the latter part of his dialogue might be, "This sickness is untreatable. I came to this town because it was my only hope. Even if it meant relying on their strange blood, I've managed to prolong my life up to this point. It's enough. If anything, I'm grateful I didn't succumb to the plague of beasts, because at least I can die human." Compare that to, "What afflicted me was incurable, but this town gave me hope. Their strange blood bought me time. I was most fortunate. Unharmed by the plague of beasts, I can even die human." You can tell just by listening that the official version is shorter, but the more literal version I had was 292 characters, with the official one being 174. And I think it's great that they were able to find a really concise way of conveying all of that information. Character limitations probably had something to do with it, but it still sounds smooth and natural. But now, since we know of a couple different safe places, it's time to talk again with the little girl.
Hello, Mr. Hunter. Still can't find my mum.
I'm still not going to give you the brooch.
Oh, okay. I can wait. But isn't there something I can do? Maybe Mum and Dad are stuck out there, waiting for me to come and find them. What do you think, Mr. Hunter?
I think maybe I'd better tell you you can wait safely in Oden Chapel.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Mr. Hunter. I love you almost as much as Mum and Dad. And Granddad.
Alright, and that was a relatively straightforward set of dialogue from the little girl. So now I'm going to head back to the Hunter's Dream, which means I'll be cutting a loading screen. See you there. Okay, here we are in the dream. And now that I have a little time, I'd like to go back and talk about the dialogue we got from the woman shut up in her house who asked us to find a safe place. I'd like to start with the first couple lines that she gives us after we knock on her door. In the official version, she says, "What is it now? I've much better ways to pass the time." Literally what she says is something along the lines of, "You again? What a nuisance. I've no business with those who can't be of any use." So this is another case where it looks like we have some pretty radical changes. But if we look at that first line as a way of expressing irritation at our repeated intrusion upon her, I think the phrase, "What is it now?" gets the point across perfectly. The second line also does convey the idea that she considers us inept. She can dismiss us like I'm going to cut this loading screen. That having been said, part of me does wish that the insult had been made a little bit more clear. But now for an item description of something that we actually got a little while ago. Flame Sprayer, a special weapon used by certain members of the Healing Church. Spits searing flames by using blood-imbued quicksilver bullets as a special medium. Not the most efficient weapon by any stretch, but sometimes a sea of flame is just what the doctor ordered. Besides, the beasts of Gehrman can always use a good cleansing. So there are a couple fun things about this translation. First, just what the doctor ordered is an English embellishment. The Japanese just says a sea of flames might be necessary. And second, the idea of the beasts of Gehrman needing a good cleansing is an implication in the Japanese, but I think it's brought out well. Now to talk with this woman.
Oh no, I haven't forgotten. Do you think I owe you something? Well, that's a fine lark, I'd say. This whole mess that Gehrman's in is all your fault. Stupidity outsiders. Our blood's ruined, tainted by your ilk. Don't you come near me. I know your type.
Cheery as ever. Anything else to say?
You. Stay away from me. I know all your tricks.
Alright, I guess I'll just leave you alone for now. Let's see if our friend over in the corner has anything to say now that we brought someone here. What do you think of this?
Ah, the hunter. Thank you. So that old girl, you told her about this place, right? Well, she don't offer me much in the way of conversation, but still, I'd rather see her alive anyhow.
Anything else to say?
If you find any sane survivors, well, send them along to Erden Chapel, will ya?
Okay then. As usual, our friend the Chapel Dweller's dialogue is fairly straightforward, although he does come across as a bit more self-deprecating in the original Japanese. The lines we got from the old woman, though, feature some more interesting translation choices. First of all, that opening line where she says, "Oh no, I haven't forgotten," is literally closer to something like, "What is it, you?" And ultimately, I'm not quite sure why they made that particular change. It does flow nicely into the next line where she asks, "Do you think I owe you something?" And it also serves as a kind of reminder to the player that, in fact, there is something that could have been forgotten. And since this is the first time we're actually seeing that character in person, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Although a line more like, "What do you want now?" seems to me like it would fit pretty well and would be a little bit closer to the Japanese. Of course, that's also pretty close to a line they've already used for her, so maybe they wanted some variation. Anyway, another interesting thing to note about the translation of her lines can be found when she says, "I know your type," and "I know all your tricks." Literally all she's saying there is, "I know." Of course, "You, stay away from me, I know," doesn't sound very natural at all. So the question becomes, what does she know about exactly? And it seems to me that there are three different possibilities here. First, the word for know could be being used as a kind of phrase. That is, maybe she doesn't literally know something, she's just using that word as part of an expression. As far as I'm aware, though, and as far as I've been able to look up, this isn't the case. That leaves two other possibilities, but I'll have to get back to them in just a minute. First, I'm going to read the description of that item I just picked up. And let me warn you, this one has some sad implications. Red messenger ribbon. Red ribbon that messengers are oddly fond of. The thick, pungent red was drawn from the organs of some unfortunate victim. A strange choice indeed, but perhaps for the messengers wearing this accessory constitutes a form of mourning. So clearly things didn't end well for someone, but I'll get back to the red messenger ribbon in just a minute. First, I'd like to finish what I was saying about the old woman's dialogue. If we discount the possibility of her using the word no as part of a set phrase, that leaves two possibilities of what she could mean when she says, I know. First, she could be claiming to know something about us. Both times she uses that line, she starts out by telling us not to come near her. This identifies the subject as our character. Of course, there's one other possibility as well. She has just been talking about how outsiders tainted the blood of Yarnamites. So she could be talking about us as outsiders. When she says she knows all of our tricks, maybe that's what she means. She knows how outsiders have messed things up, and she doesn't trust us. We, of course, have seen enough evidence to know that that's probably not what's going on, but she doesn't know that. In any case, whatever she's referencing, I feel like the official translation gets across her distrust and sounds natural in the situation. I think it's also a great example of having to work with something that can be pretty vague in the original Japanese. But anyway, now that we've finished discussing some of the key points of the translation of the old woman's dialogue, I think it would be a good idea to go back and take another look at the red messenger ribbon. So that's what we'll do after we get back to the Hunter's Dream. See you after the cut. Alright, so the first thing to say about this item is the way it relates to the storyline. While I didn't go back there in this video, the house with the little girl is now abandoned. The strong implication, therefore, is that she was going through the aqueduct to the Cathedral Ward and was eaten by that boar. Those are the sad implications I was talking about. But there are some interesting translation choices here, too. The first line is, red ribbon that messengers are oddly fond of. Literally, that would come out to something more like, red ribbon that the messengers wear for some reason. And this might seem like it reads a little bit too much into the line, but then consider the last set of lines. Literally, it's something like, odd that the messengers would be fond of this, but perhaps they wear it as a form of mourning. And the official line is, a strange choice indeed, but perhaps for the messengers wearing this accessory constitutes a form of mourning. So essentially, the fact that the messengers are oddly fond of the ribbon has been moved up. Really, I think this item is a great example in general of how you can present your information differently in a translation sometimes. But that's all the time I have for today. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, everyone.